When we talk about advanced democracies, it really makes sense to start with the European Union, which is the largest bloc of advanced democracies in the world. So who are these guys? Well, they're long-standing democracies. They're also 19th century colonial empires. They're 20th century murderers, from fascists to communists. So it's interesting to look at the evolution of this picture. This was really hard to imagine about 60 or 70 years ago. What you see here is the picture on the right is Dresden after the firebombing of Dresden. I'm sorry, the picture on the left is Dresden after the firebombing. And then you've got London, which was destroyed by German air raids on the right. In London, 30,000 people were killed during the war, 50,000 seriously injured. Hundreds of thousands were left homeless. In Dresden, the Allies dropped bombs that ignited the city, leaving between 25 and 35,000 people dead. Now, in total, World War II estimates of the dead are around 60 million, including about 20 million soldiers. The majority were in Europe, but tens of millions were in Asia as well. You also have millions of displaced persons, people who were deported by the Soviets to Siberia. Germans were sent off to various camps. So this is where Europe is coming from. The economy was also decimated. I mean, look at the ruins there. Think about the transportation infrastructure, factories being destroyed, fields strewn with unexploded bombs. You still find these. You still find these unexploded bombs in cities when they're doing waterworks programs, projects. When people are out tending to their fields, sometimes they'll find ordnances that have been left to just rust there underground. People didn't know about them, unexploded. You had cities made out of rubble. The U.S. came forward with a Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, and between 1948 and 1952 spent about $13 billion on this. Pretty much every European country outside of the Soviet satellite countries, the Soviets wouldn't let any East European countries accept. Pretty much every other European country, apart from Spain, got money. Okay, a Western European country, I should say. So $13 billion doesn't sound like a lot today, but between 1948 and 1952, it was a lot of money. So let's talk about the evolution of the European Union. The European Union started out in large part as an economic initiative, with a big caveat. For top political leaders, they thought about how cross-cutting ties could increase security as well. It would become irrational to attack another country if you were highly interconnected with that. But the masses were probably more in it for tangible economic benefits. But the fundamental point here is it was an economic initiative, but the goal from top down, and this has always been a top-down process, was to make war materially impossible. It was proposed by the French foreign minister as the European Coal and Steel Community in 1950, and it was dominated by, and it was really focused on French-German relations at first. When it went into effect in 1951, it was France and Germany, plus Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. Again, it was also designed to ensure the proper distribution of these high production goods and to limit unemployment and to further the economy more generally. So the European Coal and Steel Community in 1957 was brought into the European Economic Community. It was made into this EEC, later known as the European Community, the EC, from 1967, and then the European Union as of 1993. The European Union is now composed of about 500 million people. Okay, so the U.S. has just over 300 million. The economies measured by the GDP between the EU and the U.S. are about the same. You've had major expansions in the European Union. Going back to the map here, you can see in 1973, you had an expansion bringing Denmark and the UK and Ireland in. Then 1981, where Greece came in, 1986, Spain and Portugal, and then 1995, you had the first big group of Central European countries coming in, and then in 2004, you had another group. Oh, yeah, so that's actually incorrect. I was surprised at that. So in 1995. These weren't Central European countries at all. It wasn't until 2004. I was actually in Poland when Poland got in. This is when all the Central European countries began to come in. 2007, Bulgaria and Romania came in. And then the big question mark down there is, when is Croatia coming in? Also questions about when Albania will get in and some of these other countries. For some of these countries, it's going to be quite difficult for them to actually get in. But going back to 1995, we're talking about Sweden and Finland in particular. Those were the big ones that came in then, as well as Austria. So let's talk about the European institutions. The EU is comprised of four key institutions. You've got the European Commission, which develops legislation. It's composed of representatives who are appointed by member states' governments. So note the lack of citizen involvement here. You're further removed than if Parliament did it. So citizens go out, they vote for parties. The parties then create a government, and then the government appoints representatives. Okay, so it's a few layers removed from the citizenry. But again, the major point of the European Commission is to develop legislation. The Council of Ministers is the group that has to approve or reject legislation, and this is composed of cabinet ministers from the various member states. The European Parliament can modify or reject legislation. It doesn't develop the legislation, so it's not a typical parliament from that perspective. It also has to approve new members, and this is a key role. Now, what's interesting about the European Parliament is this is the one institution where members are directly elected. You, living in a European member state, go off and you elect who you want to represent you at the European Parliament. And the higher the population, the more representatives you're going to get. It's capped somewhere in the 90s, and there's also a minimum if it's a population that's tiny. I think the minimum is 5 or 6. Okay. But then, even for the largest states like Germany and France, you can't get more than 90 something. The final institution here is the European Court of Justice, which is out there to resolve disputes over adopted legislation. So it's important to note some important differences between intergovernmental organizations and supranational organizations. The European Union started off as an intergovernmental organization. It was designed to coordinate policy. It involves some ceding of sovereignty, okay, but not to the extent when we talk about supranational organizations. Supranational organizations are different because these organizations have sovereign power over their members, and so the EU is now one of the latter. It's moved from an intergovernmental organization, one that just coordinates, to a supranational organization, which creates its own laws that are subsequently binding on all EU member states. This means that the EU is characterized by a variety of inherent tensions. There are these attempts to bring these people together, and at the same time, there are always attempts to keep them apart. So I'll give you a few examples in the next set of slides that'll help you see how this plays out.